Hi, my name's Nick Devon, Brisbane's biggest Shia LaBeouf fan that you haven't heard of. And welcome to Radio Friendly, a channel that's not really radio friendly. Oh, fuck. Fuck. No. Fucking hell. Today, I'm going to be talking about roots. Aussie Roots music, to be specific. The sound of modern Australian roots has only come into play in the last 20 years. It's only been in the ARIA Awards since 1999. But yeah, it's a new genre to Australia compared to Aussie rock and Aussie folk and Aussie country. And it does stray away from its characteristics that, its contemporaries have over in America and Europe. Roots originally came about from Americana music, which is sort of the shared traditions and sounds of folk, blues, country, rock, and even gospel. Like, if you think about the modern Americana artists, you've got the likes of, War on Drugs, Iron and Wine, Kurt Vile, and even Mumford & Sons. So they are Americana, but you can see all those artists still share genres. They have their foot in other genres still, specifically folk and rock music. And then Americana started to transition into roots music, or roots rock music, which had an emphasis on more of the traditional Americana sounds of like Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Bonnie Raitt, those kind of artists. But as roots music started to trek across the Pacific Ocean, it started to pick up characteristics that are unlike those of sort of Americana and American roots rock. These characteristics include emphasis on slide guitar to create these tinny sort of atmospheric sounds, the incorporation of indigenous instruments like the didgeridoo, as well as a sort of a modern interpretation of folk ballads in terms of the lyrics and lyrical structure. Aussie Roots leans heavily on Australia's long tradition of sort of folk music or bush ballads, and it also leans on Australia's long tradition with country, which over time has developed its own sort of sound. Early Australian country music related to more of like the Irish, the English, sort of the Celtic ballads. Australian modern country might be more in line with what American country sounds like. The Aussie Roots, Australian roots music has sort of picked up from those traditional aspects of what Australian country used to be like. So today I will introduce you to 5 Aussie Roots albums. And these albums will all still have a common thread between them, but they still have their distinct sounds, their distinct genres that they sort of lean on. It becomes almost this melting pot of genres, melting pot of different themes and sounds, a bit like how Australia's sort of culture is a bit of a melting pot too. Number 5, we have the Waifs album, Up All Night. The Waifs are an Australian roots band that have sort of very strong ties to folk and particular country music, and they began in 1992. The Waifs are made up of 2 sisters, Vicky Thorne, who plays harmonica, guitar, and she's on vocals as well, and her sister Donna Simpson's also on guitar and vocals. And then they also have Josh Cunningham in the band, and he plays guitar as well as backing vocals. Up All Night is the 4th album by the Waifs, and it's their biggest album to date. It picked up a lot of awards when it came out in 2003. The Waifs, they sort of blend the traditional folk music with contemporary country music, and this can be heard in the rich vocal harmonies between the 2 lead vocalists. The sound of the guitars on the album is something that I quite like. It's a lot different to what you would hear in American folk or even American country. The acoustic guitars have this real thin, tinny sound to them, thanks to the metallic slides that they use. A very minimal sound, very thin sound. Slide guitars that they use, and even in particular with Aussie roots music, the slide guitars, this thin metallic-y sound, sort of conjure images of like corrugated iron, these thin metallic roofs that you might find in the bush on some huts. And this sound in the Waifs music can be heard in the opening track, Fisherman's Daughter, as well as the other tracks, Flesh and Blood, and the closing track, Up All Night. When you listen to this album, it does sound like the sort of atypical country album. The Waifs emphasize the bending notes in their guitars and the bending harmonica notes, as well as in their vocal harmonies as well, the bending in the vocals. But they also do share a lot of traits from these other bands that I'll talk about in this list, particularly the real thinny metallic slide guitars and just the overall tone and the woodiness of their instrumentation. At number 4 we have Ash Grunwald's Hot Mama Vibes. Ash Grunwald is a solo musician who occasionally plays with bands, and he incorporates a lot of heavy blues into his music. So yeah, occasionally he'll play with a band, but most of the time he utilises a stomp box to create that real percussive sound. Ash is often found playing a lap steel guitar or a similar style of guitar to that, usually tuned to an open tuning to allow those real deep bassy notes as well as the shrill higher notes, and that really just creates a more thicker sound for that one-man band. Those shriller tinny tones is one of those aspects of Australian roots music. His sound has definitely developed over his career. Originally his earlier albums were a lot of blues covers and just a lot of real minimal blues music. The sound he has on Hot Mama Vibes is the sound that he still has now in his music, and something that, you know, I find is the peak of his career. It's a real strong fusion of heavy blues, funk and roots music. Yeah, while his first albums were very minimal and it was just sort of him with a guitar, Hot Mama Vibes sees him backed by a full band, often the drums and the percussion playing these rolling sort of tribal rhythms. But it does mix up a lot. This definitely is a melting pot of different genres on this album, but it still has that real strong lean on blues. You can't really have an Aussie Roots list without mentioning Ash Grunwald. So yeah, like I said, it's a melting pot of different genres and sounds, from the funky blues opener Walking, which is one of his most famous singles, to the track Raw, which has more of an R&B, very soulful refrain. Grunwald even incorporates hip-hop on the track Lady Luck with a solid sort of breakbeat drum beat, and then even incorporates some Aussie hip-hop on the closing track Parents, which features Aussie hip-hop's funk ore. Aussie hip-hop is another beast, but Grunwald's sort of thick, distorted slide guitar really drives that ending song. His emphasis on the heavy guitar, heavy distortion in the guitar, really sets himself apart from the contemporaries in the genre. His simple, bluesy folk lyrics and his clever use of slide guitar keep him in the list. If you like Hot Mama Vibes, his later discography will be of interest, but his earlier stuff is still great. He does a fantastic cover of Smokestack Lightning, check that one out. At number 3 we have Xavier Rudd's Solace, or however you want to say it. Xavier Rudd is a singer-songwriter and a multi-instrumentalist known for his socially conscious themes that deal with spirituality and humanity, environmentalism, as well as his dedication to empowering Australia's first people and the Indigenous. At least that's what the Wikipedia bio says. He's pretty much just an Aussie hippie. He's known for the thick wall of sound he creates with his music. He is another one of those artists that's a bit of a one-man band. The sound he creates it's thick. It's, you know, he's playing a 12-string guitar that's sort of riddled in different types of distortion and effect. He's also known for having just a plethora of didgeridoos set up on stage, all set up 3 or 4 different ones that he can blow into at any given time. Pretty incredible to see an artist who's playing the guitar so energetically, as well as being able to, you know, create those rolling hypnotic rhythms with his, you know, mouth blowing into the didgeridoo, as well as creating those sounds, those barks and howls that, you know, is the traditional sound from the Indigenous people when they played the didgeridoo. Rudd beautifully incorporates sort of modern and contemporary roots and blues with sort of Australia's historical, almost folk music, Australia's traditional music. It's almost a blending of 2 folk genres, but he does it with style and grace. Now, I would have picked Rudd's first album, To Let. I really do love that album, but I think that Solace finds Rudd sort of perfecting the sound he has on his first album. Now, Solace came out in 2004, and it finds Xavier Rudd playing all the instrumentation on the album. It includes his infamous didgeridoos, as well as slide guitar, stomp boxes, and African percussion as well. The slide guitar riff that opens the album on the track Shelter is the sound that encompasses, in my mind, Aussie Roots. It's the go-to riff that I instantly relate to this genre. The thin and tinny sound of that slide, but it's also very atmospheric. Xavier Rudd emphasizes the bends and the vibrato on the slide itself. You can hear the distant sound of the slide, you know, slamming on the neck of the guitar. That's off in the distance while the note itself is in the foreground. It creates this wonderful space. While the note might be very, you know, thin, you have this wonderful sound that encompasses the note itself. and I find that Xavier Rudd can perfectly articulate that style of music. Compared to other slide guitarists in Australian music and in Australian roots, Xavier Rudd sort of takes his time with the slide. He doesn't use it very quickly. He uses it to build emotion and space, like in the title track, Solace. He cleverly mixes that slide guitar with just general chord work, as if there are multiple guitarists on the one track. GBA is a great track that utilizes all aspects of Rudd's music. The atmospheric guitar work, as well as the incredibly rich and woody sounds of the didgeridoo. The deep strums of his guitar complement that sort of growl of the didgeridoo as well. And Rudd cleverly accents the beats as he's blowing. And then his foot just carries the beat on the stomp box as well. It's all very syncopated. There's a lot going on, but it all sounds, cohesive at the same time. And then he flicks on the distortion on his guitar, and it's a clever mix of sort of chorus, reverb, a bit of delay, and some overdrive, but most importantly the wah pedal. And it's the sound of the overdrive and the wah that a lot of roots guitarists utilize. The use of those distortions creates this real thick sound for just one instrument. It also allows him to create this almost rhythm against what he's blowing into the didgeridoo. The rhythm that's coming from his foot with the wah pedal is a lot different to what's coming from his mouth blowing the didgeridoo, or even his stomp box with the other foot. The song Eurocruel is another perfect example of Rudd's didgeridoo technique. He mixes beatboxing with those barks and growls that you'd expect from a didgeridoo player. And those barks and growls, of course, resemble the animals that you would find in the bush. Rudd's music I can automatically envision, the spanning bushland 1 minute, and then the next minute I'm just envisioning the rolling beaches and the white sand. He's a visual musician, I find, and he's essential for this list. At number 2 we have the John Butler Trio's Sunrise Over Sea. John Butler Trio, they're probably arguably the most popular roots band in Australia, and John Butler is arguably, once again, one of Australia's best guitarists. John Butler leads his band, the John Butler Trio, and they started around 1998. The band have released several albums now, and every couple albums Butler will just completely change up the lineup and get a new bassist or get a new drummer in, often at the same time. Sunrise Over Sea is his 4th album, or the trio's 4th album, and it won a bunch of ARIAs at the time, a bunch of awards that year. And at the time, the trio consisted of John Butler on all the different guitars and vocals, Shannon Birchall on double bass, as well as Nicky Bomber on the drums and percussion. He recorded the album, but then he would leave straight after recording it. And then Michael Barker joined the band as the drummer for the tour. Now, John Butler, he utilises the same distortion sound that Xavier Rudd uses, but he does have more of an emphasis on the overdrive, as well as more of a heavier wah sound with him as well. He's an aggressive finger picker, often plays 12-string guitar or lap steel style guitars. Fuck, my back hurts. Sunrise Over Sea is my favourite John Butler album out of, I like a lot of his albums, but Sunrise Over Sea is my favourite, and it's what got me into John Butler and the trio. The album came out in 2004, and this was his rise to mainstream fame. He had already sort of broke through the scene with his single Better Man on his previous album, but this helped him get that mainstream fame and continue it after that. His slide guitar skills can be heard on the opening track, Treat Your Mama, and that thick slide sound resonates against Butler's sort of trademark, almost his very deep, almost hip-hop articulation to his vocals. The way he articulates his vocals when he's singing, it becomes very percussive. It's just like another instrument. Treat Your Mama then, transitions more into that atmospheric rootsy sound with the slides and the vibrato of the slide really resonating through. Nicky Bomber's drums in this track are excellent. Very percussive, very tribal, and that's the same throughout the entire record. His percussion, it's not your standard 4/4 sort of hi-hat and snare kick drum beat. He really utilises every inch of that kit. Then Shannon Birchall's bass is very thick and prominent, very woody, and often just moves and bends all over the place. It's really, really nice to listen to. I think it's perfectly showcased on the 3rd track, Company Sin. Butler's solos are always a treasure to listen to. What might start off very basic without any distortion soon builds, becomes a lot thicker as he moves from an overdrive ridden solo into more of a wah, creating that extra rhythm with his foot. They're always impressive and, very technical. Sunrise Over Sea still has those subtler and quieter moments, like in the tracks Peaches and Cream What You Want and Bound to Ramble. Bound to Ramble in particular, and as well as, you know, What You Want, really showcase Birchall's woody, thick bass notes, and then those deep woody notes paired against Butler's real deep voice add this nice depth to the music. The bass almost feels monstrous in comparison to the tinny banjo, and I envision sort of like real massive creaking trees in the bush and these rainforest trees. That's sort of what conjures up in my head when I listen to Bound to Ramble. A beautifully atmospheric and emotional track. But then also Butler, you know, in this melting pot of genres, works in traditional folk songs too, or traditional folk melodies. You hear like the Irish and the Celtic style of folk on tracks like Damned to Hell, as well as Mist. Mist being that sort of typical Celtic track with very deep rolling drum rhythms too. The closing track, Sometimes, it's one of my favourite John Butler tracks. It moves from this very soft and gentle acoustic ballad into this real thick, this epic rootsy jam between the band members. Really, definitely give that one a listen. I love this album. And at number 1 we have Jeff Lang's You Have to Dig Deep to Bury Daddy. John Butler might be the most popular and prolific roots artist in Australia, but Jeff Lang is the OG. And he's the one that sort of inspired that trademark rootsy sound, that trademark sound that John Butler utilizes. Jeff Lang is a multi-instrumentalist and singer-songwriter who has been really creative in the roots scene since the mid-90s, before there even was this scene. He plays slide guitar, banjo, mandolin, lap steel, and a plethora of other guitars, while singing these hauntingly beautiful folky ballads. Where the Waifs were more country and Ash Grunwald was more bluesy, Jeff Lang is very much more centered in the folk genre, while still incorporating and even sort of inventing his own genre of music, disturbed folk. But at the end of the day, it still works as Aussie Roots music. So this blend of music incorporates folk and blues and a bit of rock, while also incorporating these Eastern, like even African or Indian style melodies, where he might either with the slide or just hammer on with the guitar, playing real quick flat or sharp notes to create this almost dissonant sound that you wouldn't hear in sort of contemporary rock or pop music. But he really utilizes this sound to his advantage. Jeff Lang's lyrics are sort of typically Australian, distinctly Australian, like a ragged bushman's ballad brought into the 21st century. So this album, You Have to Dig Deep to Bury Daddy, came out in 2005, and it's one of my favourite Jeff Lang albums. It's one of the ones I listen to the most, but that's also because half of his fucking older music isn't even on Spotify. Those tones that I was talking about with John Butler's style, the wah and the overdrive, stem from what Jeff Lang was doing in the mid-90s with his music. And those sounds are still relevant in Aussie Roots now and on this 2005 album. Lang's vocals are a lot sweeter than, well, gentler and nicer to listen to than other artists in this genre. They're hauntingly beautiful, almost like your standard folk ballad. But Lang flips that quick smart and incorporates these real shrill and heavily distorted slide guitar notes and slide guitar riffs. So this genre melding of folk, blues, and sort of these Eastern melodies is perfectly showcased on the second track, Here She Comes Again, as well as the track Damaged People. These intricate weaving melodies sort of intertwine with each other. It's pretty captivating to listen to. This album is one of the best examples of slide guitar in Australian music, I reckon. The atypical sort of atmospheric Aussie Roots sound can be found on tracks such as And the Snow Melted, as well as Carriages Grind in the Half Light Rush. Lang really does know how to use the slide perfectly. The vibrato is almost its own instrument. It's its own sound. The way he creates mood and space with just a simple slide is crazy to listen to. This album is hefty in track length. It's at 21 tracks in around an hour and 48 minutes long, but it's a great album still. A lot of tracks go for about 9 minutes long, but it's just really captivating and mesmerizing to listen to these songs. The album ends with this great Tom Waits cover of Big in Japan. It doesn't really fit. It's a live cover. It doesn't really fit the style of the album itself, but it is, it's fun. Just go ahead and give this album a listen. So there you have it. There's an introduction to Aussie Roots music with 5 great albums that I personally enjoy. There's a Spotify playlist in the description linking you to all these albums, and I'll link another playlist too that includes some of the other albums I spoke about from these artists, as well as a couple Roots artists that I didn't get to mention. Subscribe to the channel, like us on Facebook, give us a comment on anything. I'll have a little chat with you, and give me suggestions for further, genre guides or another After the Hype. Cheers.